The planet is on a healing path from coronavirus. Vaccination against COVID-19 has begun around the world. The best virologists promise to bring people back to normal reality. What's happening now in different countries? Where quarantine has become a way of life? When can we breathe again without masks? All this in the Stopcovid program. The rate of vaccination has slowed sharply in dozens of countries around the world at once due to the suspension of the use of the British-Swedish vaccine. After its application, some recipients either developed thrombosis or the vaccination ended in death. In a week, while the connection between accidents and the drug itself was thoroughly tested, each of the countries fell behind the vaccination plan by about 100,000 doses. According to the company manufacturer, confirming this by the conducted research, vaccination could not cause death or serious illness. Now almost the whole world is back to using the British-Swedish vaccine. It is this drug that is eagerly awaited in Mexico. The United States of America will supply 2.5 million doses to its southern neighbor. So far, only medical personnel have been vaccinated in the country, and now came the turn of the retirees. They fanatically wear masks, strongly miss the holidays with loud feasts, and set new sad records. This year, Mexico ranked third in the world in terms of deaths from coronavirus. Of the 2 million infected, 200,000 have not been able to overcome the disease. Now the country is slowly emerging from the second lockdown. Unlike the first, it did not last long, but it was very difficult for the residents, as well as the last year. Somewhere before the new year, Mexico City closed due to the second wave. It was at the red zone, and then it changed from red to orange zone on March 15th. Restaurants have already been partially opened. You can welcome only 20% of the restaurant's occupancy. Theaters, cinemas are just opening now. Shopping malls used to close at 4 p.m. Now they're already working normally. At the entrance, you must measure the temperature and sanitize your hands with antibacterial gel.
При входе необходимо померить температуру и взять антибактериальный гель на руки.
Now the country has opened establishments in almost all spheres of life, but with new rules. The workload, for example, of cafes and restaurants should not exceed 20% of the possible number of guests. By the way, was this sector that was opened in the first place because of the great love of Mexicans for food. There are more places to eat in Mexico City than anything else. It's cafes and restaurants that bring the main income to the treasury and create a huge number of jobs. There is a food culture in Mexico. Therefore, of course, the closing of restaurants was a tragedy for the Mexicans and became a true holiday when they were finally opened again. They love to gather on Sunday mornings for breakfast with the whole family, with children and dogs. For them, having breakfast in the morning and getting their family together is very, very important.
A servir a la comunidad, en la iglesia y bueno,
Juvenal's life from Mexico City has changed both for the better and for the worse over the past year. From Monday to Friday, he's a lawyer. On weekends, a deacon at the local church. When the arbitration court was closed, the main breadwinner in the family was left without the main source of income. The court proceedings were temporarily suspended. The man earned his living by legal advice. Now all the work is in full swing online, as well as the service in the church. Parishioners only get together on social media. Juvenal admits that when you are over 60, it's difficult to curb advancing technology. Having a positive attitude and faith helps to cope with everything.
El Señor esté con ustedes. Del Santo Evangelio según San Juan. Sí han existido cambios en mi vida.
People run in their usual rhythm. They have no time to think. Last year I had to catch my breath, look inside myself. It was a spiritual test. Those who did not pass this exam became weaker. Those who aspired to spiritual development got stronger and became better and more mature. There were many advantages. For example, I had time to fill in some gaps in my professional activity.
A una audiencia, a consultar un expediente.
Если говорить о положительных вещах, которые случились благодаря пандемии, то это...
If we talk about the positive things that happened due to the pandemic, then this is the timing of registration of migration documents. Previously, documents were processed somewhere within 2 months and even sometimes up to a year. The migration office closed on the 20th of December and it opened in mid-February. It was closed due to the second wave. Mexico City was at a red zone. Foreigners complained on Facebook because many of the immigration documents which allow them to stay in the country or, for example, have the right to work have expired. But then, after everything got opened, it turned out that now the whole procedure can be completed within 1 day.
Оказалось, что теперь всю процедуру можно пройти в течение 1 дня. У меня сегодня по плану посещение миграционного офиса.
I plan to visit the migration office today. Here you can meet the entire world. It's all foreigners standing in line. As you can see, everyone is wearing masks. Security, customers, people who just walk by. They're all wearing masks.
Люди, которые идут просто мимо, все в масках.
Elizabeth shows a summer video from her birthday celebration. Before the coronavirus, there would have been many more guests at her birthday. Now, many relatives from the risk group avoid meetings as much as possible. Her biggest dream is to hug them again.
Esta enfermedad, esta pandemia.
The first thing I will do when this is over, I will thank God that we're all healthy, and finally, I will bring my whole family together. I haven't seen some of the relatives for a year. I hope everything will be back to normal. Everyone will be vaccinated.
Como ama de casa también en esa parte.
Вакцинация страны будет проходить в 5 этапов. На данный момент на нее...
The vaccination of the country will take place in 5 stages. At the moment, only citizens who are over 60 years old can sign up. They can do it on the website. Vaccination takes place in areas of the city called Al-Qaidi. And when the time of the area comes, a person receives a text message, and he must come to the vaccination point. You can't choose a vaccine, it's like a lottery. So when a person comes for vaccination, he will be informed after the fact which vaccine he will receive. At the moment, there are various vaccines available.
Какая вакцина будет ему поставлена? На данный момент представлены различные вакцины в стране.
Today in Mexico, all possible vaccines are used: American, British-Swedish, Chinese, and Russian. Most of all, they talk about the latter. It was the Russian vaccine that they used in Mexico to vaccinate their athletes who would fly to the Olympics in Tokyo, and it was the Russian vaccine that they tried to counterfeit here. Fortunately, none of these doses have been used.
Bueno, en realidad la vacuna pues es una...
At first, I was totally against vaccinations. I also have a drug allergy. Then I reconsidered my views. My son has already signed me up. I am in a group that will be vaccinated after medical workers. I'm over 60, but the vaccine distribution system itself remains unclear for me. I still don't understand in what order and how everything will happen.
No sabemos exactamente.
Que tengan más de 60 años.
I will be vaccinated. As a child, I missed one of the basic ones, and then I strongly suffered a serious illness. So I'm waiting for my turn.
Diferentes alcaldías en la Ciudad de México.
На данный момент...
At the moment, in order to fly to any country, it's necessary to take a blood test 72 hours in advance. Also, the airline can send for additional analysis before landing. Upon arrival, the passenger must comply with the rules of the country where he arrives. And for example, if you take a flight from Mexico to Russia with a stopover in Europe, you don't have to take another test in Europe. But it turns out that if you take into account the rules of Russia, then a person must pass up to 3 tests per trip. This, of course, is some kind of additional spending and some kind of discomfort. And it makes you wonder, maybe you can wait a little longer until these rules are cancelled and not fly anywhere.
Приятное ощущение, и как-то вот задумываешься, может быть, подождать еще, пока все эти правила отменят и никуда не лететь.
On the other side of the earth, people in the country are going to en masse to travel, albeit in their own country. In Iran, the year 1400 has come. There is a different chronology. Now they have 2 weeks of vacation ahead. Many families are planning to visit relatives in other cities. Even fines do not scare Iranians. Their size varies from $8 to $48, depending on the city. For the local population, these are significant sums. The average salary in the country does not exceed $200. The only thing that visually now reminds of the pandemic in Iran are masks, but not everyone is wearing them properly. As you can see, there are not very many people now, but I think there will be more by evening because the Iranian New Year is approaching and now people are shopping. By evening, there are indeed more people on the shopping streets of Tehran, and so much so that it's physically impossible to keep a distance of 1.5 meters. On the sidewalks, real traffic jams are formed from local residents, while cafes, restaurants, shopping centers, and markets work as in the old days, without limiting the number of customers and reducing working hours. Despite such an active social life, now, as the locals say, people have begun to take the threat of infection seriously. Nobody perceives COVID as a seasonal cold anymore. But a year ago, everything was different. The carelessness of the Iranians in the first wave almost turned into a national tragedy. Last year, there were a lot of patients with coronavirus in Iran. Hospitals were not ready for such an influx. This happened because people did not take the danger of the virus seriously. Today, there are no problems with masks or antiseptics. People have become more serious about the situation. Iran will release its vaccine soon, and I really hope that the virus will be finished. Yulia and her daughters left Iran for Russia last year for the sake of their own health and safety. The girls greatly missed their city, friends, and their father, who remained at home. The eldest daughter went to first grade in Russia, and when in January the situation in Iran became stable, the whole family returned home. Tehran, says Yulia, for 10 years of life has become more familiar and more comfortable. We flew back to Iran in January this year. Upon arrival, it's required to have a PCR test for coronavirus. All of us took the test, both my daughters, myself, and the youngest, who at the time was 2 years and 7 months old. Life in Iran is radically different. Restaurants do not serve knives. At home, locals are used to eating on the floor. But most importantly, imports in Iran are almost unavailable. The country has been living under tough sanctions for a long time. Fighting a new unknown virus in these conditions is not easy. Of the 80 million citizens, 2 million have already been infected.
На днях корпус стражи Исламской революции
Recently, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps presented its development of a rapid test in Iran. This gives us hope because Iran has been under severe sanctions for more than 40 years, and despite this, it finds the means and strength to fight the coronavirus.
И несмотря на это, находит средства и силы для борьбы с коронавирусом.
Now, Iran has already begun to vaccinate medical workers. So far, only imported drugs are used: Russian, Indian, and Chinese vaccines. Perhaps local doctors will soon start working with domestic vaccines. In mid-March, Iran presented its own scientific development. The vaccine was developed in honor of the deceased martyr, in honor of the scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. The presentation of this vaccine was attended by the Minister of Health of Iran and the Minister of Defense, as well as the family of the deceased martyr. Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was one of the most prominent scientists in Iran, chief physicist of the country responsible for the nuclear program. His car was attacked last November. He died in hospital from his injuries. It was a great loss for Iran. For the next 3 days, the country was in mourning, and now the vaccine under his name should save millions of people. Schools, universities, and institutes in Iran continue the educational process online. As for kindergartens, part of them are open. Some kindergartens ask the parents to write them a note. If a child gets sick, they disclaim all responsibility.
В случае, если ребенок заболеет, они снимают с себя всю ответственность.
In summer, Iran plans to begin mass vaccination of the population, and in September they promise to return pupils and students to their desks. But while doctors and authorities expect a new surge of infections, no risks took place here in March. In Iran, the chronology is based on this holiday. On the streets of the city, fireworks lit up all night. Now the country has New Year's holidays. The most popular destinations had to be closed. Iran has a difficult year ahead. In addition to the task of vaccinating the country's population, and this is just over 80 million people, presidential elections are expected here in the summer. The new leader will have to deal with the massive economic impact of the epidemic. Surprisingly, even after a year of the spread of COVID-19 across the planet, there are still corners of the world untouched by the virus. Now, the largest northern island of the Earth, Greenland, is absolutely free of masks, sanitizers, and infected with coronavirus. Already isolated by the sea, glaciers, and eternal winter, people now cannot fly to the mainland without a reason of prime necessity. This is how the street I walk on every day looks like. Here is the view and the sea. There should be mountains in the back, but they are not visible. It's snowing here today. Hello, my name is Mila. I live on the island of Greenland in the small town of Maniitsoq. We have a population of only 2,500 people. This is a very small, isolated town. As in principle, everyone else in Greenland. Greenland welcomes April with the usual frost. The air temperature ranges from -14 to -20 degrees. There are no restrictive measures on the island, except that the terrain itself and impassable snowdrifts. Everything works: a taxi, a cafe, and a gym. People walk freely.
Когда мир охватила пандемия коронавируса, мы особо это не почувствовали в Гренландии, потому что у нас не было так много случаев заражения.
When the coronavirus pandemic swept the world, we didn't really feel it in Greenland because we didn't have that many cases. And probably at first, only last year, we had 11 people sick in the capital. And then the capital was closed for a 2-week quarantine. It was impossible to enter or leave. The sale of alcohol was closed, and it was impossible to gather with more than 10 people. And since that time, there have been only 31 cases of infection. No one was in the hospital and no deaths. That is, everyone recovered.
Всего было только 31 случай заражения. Никто не лежал в больнице без летальных исходов, то есть все выздоровели.
In public places, they only ask to keep your distance, but in fact, no one does this. If everywhere people lose their jobs due to the pandemic, on the island, everything remains the same. And even on the contrary, the demand for certain professions has increased.
В каких-то сферах стала работа немножко больше.
In some areas, there are more jobs now. In the areas of cleaning, for example, because everything had to be disinfected. In stores, of course, you need to keep your distance, but no one does it.
Этого никто не делает.
Самая главная улица города.
The most important street in the city, and people walk without masks. They freely go about their business. This is school. Further, there is a shop, a bank, a post office, a church, a bus stop, and the main square.
И главная площадь.
The coronavirus and the global pandemic still affected the emotional state of the Greenlanders. Anxiety has appeared. Closed borders don't help either. Previously, from Greenland, people mainly flew to Denmark or Iceland. Air services are now open for urgent needs, such as medical emergencies and business flights.
Не так легко выехать сейчас из Гренландии.
It's not so easy to leave Greenland now. I wanted to go on vacation, for example. I would like to go to see my parents, but this is a little difficult now because you need to be in quarantine in Denmark and in Latvia and then here.
Сидеть на карантине и в Дании, и в Латвии, и потом еще здесь.
In Ludmila's town, not a single infected person was registered, and there is not a single maternity hospital here. A month ago, the woman had to go to the capital to give birth to her third baby. But even there, she did not notice any changes in comparison with her previous life. She didn't even have to take a COVID test before giving birth. Now Ludmila is happy. It's good that schools and kindergartens are open, otherwise it would have been difficult. In March, vaccines were brought to Greenland. It was not easy at all. Denmark sent a warship equipped with special refrigerators. It will be even more difficult to vaccinate all 56,000 inhabitants. Tiny towns and villages are scattered throughout the island. Many of them are difficult to access.